Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Ihsan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 84 of the podcast, and it is September 14th, 2022, as we record this. Our main topic today is production and publication schedules. We don't have any new patrons this week, so thank you to our existing patrons for believing in us and in the podcast. And you can go check out the different options at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN. What are you reading, Eric?
Oh my gosh. Still reading the same book I was reading last week. I feel like
Death Masks.
I'm
Me
behind.
too. I'm reading the same book I was reading last week.
I'm gonna blame a typical scapegoat for why I'm still reading Death Masks is I got to the Portland Public Library, Multnomah County Public Library. Hats off for having an awesome collection of graphic novels. I found a bunch of just a great stack of them when I was there with my kid last week. And so, I'm lay down in bed at the end of a hard day and you got this like shiny graphic novel. It's hard not to grab it. So I've been reading, there's a series called Joe Golem, the Occult Detective. It's a really cool kind of ghost mystery stuff. And I found a stack of like 4 of those books. What was I gonna do? What was I gonna
Right.
do?
Okay.
I had to
Joe
grab them.
Golem, the Occult Detective series.
Yeah. It's
Graphic
Mike
novels
Mignola. Yeah, they're fantastic. And
by
yeah, so
Mike how do you spell his last name?
Mignola. He's the guy who created Hellboy.
Oh, okay.
So, and he's a Portland person, or I think he was a Portland person. I don't keep up on that so much anymore, but yeah, it was just there. What was I gonna do? So
Well,
the stack got bigger and the book got buried. What about you?
I did choose Jane and the Unpleasantness at Scargrave Manor. So that's what I was reading. The mystery. Remember, I was trying to decide between the two mysteries.
Yeah.
So it was the Jane Austen mystery. The pretend Jane Austen. The Jane Austen mystery in which Jane Austen is the character of the book.
Right.
It's by Stephanie Barron. And I'm really enjoying it, actually. So I do have a couple of other books in that same series, but as we talked about last time, I would not be reading the second in the series right away. It'll probably be,
Right.
a few months before I get back to it. And I put up a new I'm reorganizing my office and trying and moving furniture around. I got another bookcase because my book piles were shoved too deep in the other bookcase I have, and then piles stacking up on the floor. So I put another bookcase in, and I have not managed to get the books off the floor yet, but so I might need to still double stack. I don't know.
The means to do so is there, but
no, not really, because
Yeah.
my bookcase, the new bookcase, is pretty much already full, and there's still a pile of books on a substantial pile of books on the floor. So, yeah, I'm seeing all these other books that I have to read, and I'm thinking, ooh, that one looks good. Ooh, that one looks good. So I have no idea what will be next, but it will not be the second Jane Austen mystery.
No. If anybody has any insight into how we read series, leave it in the comments or send us an email. I'd love to know how other people read their series, because I find a lot of people tell me they just read the whole series in a row.
That's what my husband does. He will read the whole thing, even if it is, what was that one ship one? It was like
Master and Commander.
He read all 21 books in a row
Get
before
out. That's
he
like
moved
a
on.
year of like description of
There's
sails and
no
riggings and things.
way I would ever,
That's
ever do that.
We need to have him on as a guest and just talk about that. That's a lot.
That's a lot. Right
Now,
now,
when you put
right now he's reading Dune.
Oh, well, there you go.
Rereading.
There's time well spent. Here's my thinking about that. When people say they read the whole series in a row, that's kind of where I think it's a whole, let's say 21 books. Let's say you read one book a week. That's a half a year reading the same. Let's say it's all sailing books like the Master and Commander stuff.
Yeah.
That's 1 6-month period reading the same space, like I need a little, if I'm going to read, a paranormal mystery in one book, I'm going to find something to different world it, to to break that up. So
Hmm.
interesting. We need to have him on as a guest. She's giggling. Anybody who
The
isn't
binge
watching,
culture. I think that's what it is.
but
Some
it's,
people.
hey, look, as a person writing a series, like when I get to book 5 and 6 of the series, I want your husband reading them, because then he'll buy all of them, and
There
then
you go.
that's called sell through. That's what we're all shooting for. So what are you
Bigger
writing?
ROI. What am I writing?
What are you writing?
Nothing right now. Right now I'm gonna go
That's
to
not,
Turkey
you
in
can't admit that on a writing podcast that you're not writing.
I turned my book into the editor, so I'm working on my
Oh,
website. I
okay.
started working on my author website, and I am thinking, okay, so here we go. I guess I am. I'm thinking about this short story that I'm going to be in an anthology, or submitted anyway to the anthology. And the deadline is December 1st. So I have to come up, and I'm not a short writer, so I was thinking,
Mm.
well, maybe I'll do an essay or something, but it has to be bookstore themed. And since I work in a
Oh,
bookstore, it was like, oh,
got it.
well, sure. I've
Naturally.
worked there for 3 years, so there's got to be something, but
Right.
I'm blanking because of the deadline. So,
Don't look at
which
the deadline.
we have to think about that as the segue to the topic. So
You have two
let's,
major holidays between now and when that's due. You've got Thanksgiving, you've got my son's birthday. Oh wait, sorry, I mean Halloween. Which in our
yeah, and
house,
I'm
that's the,
traveling. Yeah, so I
oh,
have
well
to, yeah,
then
I
there's
have
not,
2 weeks.
you're going to a foreign country, whatever. No
Yeah,
big deal.
no big deal.
What's
So
a
yeah,
big deal?
so I'm thinking about like what kind of short story, and I've got my coworker at the bookstore actually gave me a little kernel of an idea that's sort of
Oh,
percolating, and yeah,
be
so,
like an oyster, make that little kernel into a pearl. That's what you need to do.
and I think the
Cool.
traveling to Turkey will polish that up, or at least see if it's viable, like I'm mixing metaphors terribly. Let's
No,
move
I
on.
get you. I think everybody gets you. Um, yeah, I have that 100-mile radius. Like once I get 100 miles outside of Portland, it's like suddenly the story brain goes like, oh, we could use this, we could use this, we could use this. So you'll be thousands of miles outside of
Yeah,
Eugene. Yeah.
maybe I'll come up with a Turkish bookstore story
Ooh.
with an international flavor. I don't know.
Oh,
There's a
everybody
lot.
likes that
I
international.
have a couple ideas that are kind of percolating. So, okay. And what's your update? I was going to move
I
into our
am,
topic, but I forgot to ask you how you were
yeah, so I
doing.
guess I'm so Chasing Shadows has been out for a month. So I have been in that time, I've been working on the two follow-up shorter books. They're not novels. They're each, there's going to be two novellas. There might be a third one. Um, and I've also been developing a Patreon, short story Patreon strategy. I'm overthinking that. Um, that's the way I do things. So yeah,
It's
I've been
part of
kind of
your
devised.
process.
Well, I look, I think there's that. I've had this conversation multiple times in the last week. I think there's that little extra bit of planning makes it go a little better, right? And we're going to talk about production, so this is going to be our segue. But
Okay. This is the
knowing
segue.
what the order, like I have 16. I want to do a story a month. I've got 16 stories figured out right now. Like here's the 16 stories that I'll launch with, knowing I can write them. I think if I'm going to put something on the schedule, it's good to like have as much of that figured out. If I was doing that next month and I only had 3 stories, and because I think it's part of like scheduling and stuff is planning for success, right? I want
Mhm.
to, within 3 months, have a lot of the people on my mailing list and a lot of the strangers in my life subscribe to that. I want to make sure they get that content because,
Okay, so let's back up just a little bit and say, okay, we're
okay.
starting to talk about this because it feels like exactly what you're saying. I want to so in case people haven't tuned in yet, we're done with the update.
No more
Now
updates.
we're talking about the production and publication schedules. So now let's reiterate what you just said. So if you have a plan
Right,
to open this Patreon account
right.
and launch it to the public, one of the benefits is this monthly short story.
Right. That
So
is
that
primary
would,
benefit.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that would go in your production schedule because you know you
Absolutely.
have to deliver a short story every month. So
Absolutely.
so then I'm going to turn it back over to you and tell me
Sure.
how you put that in your schedule. Let's get into the weeds. Like, where are you putting it in your schedule so that you know that you can provide this?
So, and I'm glad this perfect time to have this conversation because I've been really focusing on doing this. So what I'll do is I plan on launching this Patreon in January because everybody's flowing with money in January, and that's a great month to launch things, right? Nobody spent any money the month before, so they'll all have their
I know my book's
$4 a month
coming out
thing.
January 1st. I don't know if that's great, but whatever.
So what I did was my short stories they're all witness accounts, right? In my paranormal universe, they're all just short little, like, this person saw this weird thing and here's the story of what they saw. So when I came up with this idea, I thought, okay, I'm going to release on January, February, March, winter, spring, summer. So I devised stories that fit the season. So in January, you'll get a story that takes place in winter. So
Okay.
once I figured out that's what I was going to do, I have a notebook of my story ideas, and it just so happened that when I was on the road trip, I filled that with a bunch of just little snippet accounts. And so I just started writing, like, I have a document going where it's like January story. This is what it is. February, March, April. I went all the way down. So once I completely mastermind I think actually to say I have I have more like 18 right now. So once I figure out what all those are, I'm going to stop coming up with new ones because I have to develop the ones that are there fully. Once I've developed all of those, I'm going to write the first three. And I've got a group
Develop
of
what?
beta. The first three short stories, I'll write those in November.
Okay.
I'll write the ones that I plan on releasing January, February, and March. I'll write those in write those in November. And I've got two beta readers, maybe three, who were big fans of that sort of idea, that thing I was doing. And I asked them if they would just beta read them for two reasons. One, I want them to be a little better than the last ones, and I want them to be more focused I want them to be focused and adjacent to the story world that I'm writing in novel. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to write those in probably November. I've got enough of them fleshed out. They won't take very long. I'll probably have to commit a week to writing those stories, or 2 weeks. So I'll
2
submit
weeks
those.
to writing 3 stories?
2 weeks to writing 3 stories.
Dude, how? I don't even know. I would
So
think one per month would keep me, especially
so
because
I
you've
write
got other writing projects and other, side hustles and.
Yeah, so I commit to at least 3,000 words on a writing day.
Okay.
That's kind of that's just what's natural, actually. And hats off to Eric Witchie and the parallel play crew, because that discipline of 8 to noon in the seat working on that project gets me there. And actually, that whole idea of the thing that Eric Witchie's doing in that group works for me. It just, I get disciplined to it. I will do nothing, between 8 and noon. I will schedule nothing. The key for me with those stories is it's getting the voice. And once I get that character voice, it flows like nothing else. So
like butter.
And so, like, what I actually do to know I can write the story is I just have to get their first sentence. I have to get their first line down. And I have most of the first lines written for those because they just, again, came to me while I was traveling and I was in the perfect space. So I'll commit a couple of weeks to those, writing those. I'll submit those to my betas. I'll get their feedback. I ask them all for feedback by December 1st. That will be story-based feedback, right? Although I have one beta reader that's like, well, this is actually, it's affect, not effect. Like, thanks.
We love those.
Which is helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not being snarky. I'll implement their changes and then turn them over to a line editor. For those who didn't see that, I just kind of nodded to Val.
Winked it.
And then I'll get those together. I think at that point, so I can fit this into my production schedule because between now and the first of the year, I'm working on 2 novellas that are basically written.
Mm-hmm.
I will just be implementing changes as I go. So I'm not like in that novel writing push where I'm gonna, I'm trying to write 80,000 words. I am at this point rewriting about that many words. So that's a little different mental and schedule commitment for me. And so my feeling is that once I get those first 3 together, I'm gonna just probably commit the time to writing the rest of the year of those stories. I
In
will,
terms of that becoming your new writing project, like you're not going
that
to be
will,
working on a novel, you'll just be working on the Patreon essays for the rest of the year until that's done, and then you'll switch to novel writing again.
yes, I think my
Okay.
sense is that by the time the end of the year comes, I will have 3 of those shorts written
So you
and
can
ready to
launch. Mm-hmm.
produce. I will have the 2 novellas that I plan on in the main series being my sort of winter and spring releases. Those will be in the process of, we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
offline, about there'll be some line editing going on there.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be one after another. So I'll be working through that. But then, yeah, after the first of the year, I think if everything launches right, and I get a big hit off of those releases.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good feeling, and I think Patreon's gonna feed into that. It's just a monthly release of that, and that gets me that excitement. Yes, I think I will then, between January and February, probably commit to writing the next 9 things. So I have the
Mm-hmm.
whole year written out and ready to go. So I don't ever want to be writing to deadline. That's what I try to avoid when I schedule things. Is I don't want to be, I see people like, "Oh, I got my pre-release. It's got to be in by the 20th, and
Yeah.
I'm implementing edits on the 18th." Like I miss those deadlines. So, yeah.
That's a good segue actually into setting up um, deadlines for yourself. So, publication schedule. For instance, I have forecasted out that I will be publishing my memoir January 1st. And the
Yay.
way
On first, is that the actual day is the first?
well, I'm not actually going to be in town on that day, but that's the
On or
plan
around.
on,
Right.
on the road publication. So yeah, I guess I'm leaving that. I don't know, maybe I'm delusional, but I guess I'm in denial of that being. I'll be in Port Townsend at a friend's house, probably recovering from the night before, and somehow I
Oh,
still
that's
believe I'm going to be launching that day. But anyway, for the purposes of this conversation, I had to reverse engineer kind of
right.
my actually I didn't reverse engineer. I just did it to begin with. Like my plan was to, how do I say this? I know how long it takes. You know how long it takes to
More or less.
write how many words. And the editing part is more amorphous,
Yes.
Like, how long is it going to take me to edit this? Well, I don't know. Like I've gone through the whole book. Well, I think it needs something else. And I go back through it again. And so if I allow myself, I know how many days a week I can devote to writing on it or editing it. I know how many days a month I have available to me outside of, other obligations and appointments and travel and holidays and stuff. So I knew how much and I knew how fast I worked and I know how focused I can get. So
Right.
knowing yourself is like the number one key, and being
Number one
really
skill. Yeah.
number one skill, knowing your
Yeah.
process, knowing yourself, knowing what you can accomplish in a certain amount of time. And you're not going to know that right away. If you're a
No.
new baby author, like you're just winging it, and that's fine. You're
Yes.
just data collecting, just
Yeah.
do the thing, time yourself so that you know how long it takes you to do A, B, or C. So knowing yourself, and also here was the kicker for me, being really honest with
Yeah.
yourself. So
Skill number 2.
because I have that, like superwoman gene, that the guilt trip of not being able to do it all and thinking you
Oh yeah.
can. And, so having the expectation of being able to do something in a certain amount of time doesn't mean that you actually can do that and that there actually is enough seconds in the day to accomplish that thing. So coming to terms with that. And if you have any, I read this book, it was brilliant, and I don't remember where I read it, but I totally internalized it. And it said, if you have an expectation of, how long something takes, say, that it'll take you 6 months to write a novel for the first draft. So if it's going to take you 6 months and you just know that and you're planning for that, if you are doing anything else in your world, like raising a family or
All right.
working full time or taking care of aged, parents, or, something else, if there's something else in your world, you have to double that. So
interesting.
And if you've got multiple things going on, say you've got kids with special needs and aging parents that you're putting in memory care, and you work full time and you're trying to write a book, like,
Triple it.
just be patient and maybe have no expectations, because you just don't know, and life's going to get in the way, and internalizing that and accepting that goes a long way to keeping you sane. Let's just say that.
And I can say that my first year doing this thing, the self-publishing part of it, was a lesson in that. Like, I immediately went into it thinking like, well, I'm going to be this kind of person. I see these people doing rapid releases. I write every day. I can be that person. And I went at my first thing with like, it's going to take me 4 months to do this. I'm going to set up the pre-order in 3. And that's not a joke. I literally said, I can beat my deadline. I can beat a deadline that I've never even set before myself. And that was a disaster, because then you set the pre-order and then you got to back it up. And then it creates that self-doubt that you didn't need, actually. So I think giving yourself knowing how long it takes you to do something at the first time, and giving yourself cushion. And this applies to other things in self-publishing, right? I mean, it's just the moment you hand the thing off, if you plan on submitting your manuscript to agents on, a certain day, give yourself enough time to get the book ready for that certain day. It's not just self-publishing. It's not just Patreon. It's not just Kickstarter. It's anytime you're saying this thing will be ready to leave my hands in the best possible form, that's the deadline we're talking about. That's the time, the launch date you're giving yourself.
And it's self-imposed, usually. If you're indie publishing, you are, for sure. Or if you're scheduling, even if you're trying to get traditionally published, like having your book edited before you turn it over to the agent actually is a good idea these days.
Do that.
So that's an internal deadline. You set that yourself. So,
these are all, that's a great point. This is all self-created deadlining, timing out. Like, there's nobody standing over your shoulder like it's a day job that's saying you have to have a report by Friday. It's like,
but you and I both work well with deadlines, and some people don't.
Right.
So having a deadline is good for me. It motivates me. It keeps me on track. It keeps me focused because I have this deadline. So I like setting myself deadlines, except for when it turns toxic. And then I start, that spiral of self-hatred, and like, I can't get this, and what's wrong with me? And then the stress just becomes all consuming. So I had an author friend, Anthony Sinclair. He said he never sets a launch date. He would never set a publication release date until he turns the book over to the proofreader.
Wow,
so it's done.
The end.
And and then he knows, okay, in a month I'll be able to, and then he can set up the pre-order and whatever. So
let's have him on.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about, that's a really sane way to do this.
Well, it got me thinking like, oh yeah. And also, I've published 3 books. This will be my 4th one. And nobody knows who I am. That's not me being whatever.
Right.
It's just the reality of it. There's millions of stories out there, and nobody knows who I am. So if I miss my deadline, I don't have, a giant following that will be really mad at me for missing
Right.
my deadline. So if it doesn't come out January 1st, it's not the end of the world.
Only you. Yeah. And the
I'll
people
be
listening.
disappointed in myself, but it'll be learning experience. I'll know when to set the deadline next time. So I don't know. Those are all like things to think about when you're setting deadlines for
Yeah.
yourself or not setting deadlines for yourself.
Yeah, I think what motivates a motivator for me is when I said when I said to myself, like, January, this is going to come out, like I'm going to do this on January. That gave me something to gun for. Now,
Mm-hmm.
January is a 31-day target, so it could be January 1st. It could be January 31st. It's a window, right? So I didn't say January 15th or something. But I also I think deadlines. I work well with deadlines because at this juncture, like, I do have a small mailing list, not huge, but I get that I can anticipate that acceptance, that exterior validation, if we're talking kind of psychological. So there is that once I say I'm going to do this in this time, I can sort of, this sounds weird when I say it out loud, but I can sort of look forward to the kudos that are going to come when I announce this to my mailing list. And people, oh, this is great. I've been waiting for these stories, or I loved these. I can't wait. I think that's when you start to get in a bit of a groove, you can, you like hedge your fear of deadlines against the joy that comes from meeting them. Because there is joy that comes when you meet that deadline and you get to press publish, and
Mm-hmm.
then the things come back to you. That's what we're doing this for. It's for readers, really. It's just to satisfy readers. So
And in terms of comparing yourself to other authors. So
there's
when
there's a gremlin.
I first decided, okay, I'm an author, I published my first book and I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And I had been following the industry, listening to podcasts, knowing how many of my favorite authors were publishing every year. And I thought, well, I don't want to kill myself. I'm not a rapid release kind of person, but I could see publishing a couple books a year. I could do that. I write,
Right.
whatever. And so I was comparing myself to other authors by coming up with a plan that I thought sounded logical without knowing my process.
Right.
So that was mistake number 87,
87.
So, I mean, everybody says avoid comparisonitis and it's not good for you, but
It's
like
hard not to.
you can compare yourself to others if you're trying to fit yourself in. Like, I'm comparing myself to a rapid releaser. That's not the world I want to live in. I can't have that. That's not my personality. So I'm comparing myself to that in terms of, do I want this job? Could I wear it? No, I don't want this job. So that's a good kind of comparison. So, but I can't, here's an example. I thought, okay, I can publish 2 books a year. That's not too rapidy, that I could accomplish that. But since I didn't know how long it actually took to write and edit and do all the nitty-gritty details of self-publishing, and because I didn't know all that, 2 books a year was impossible. So I
Oh
had to
yeah.
go through the pain of learning that I couldn't do it, and then that I can't verbiage enters your mindset, and that's really hard to get rid of. So changing that to, I can publish 2 books a year, just not yet. I have to get a few more
Right.
books published, before I get my groove. Now I've got a process, but every book is different, I've learned now.
Yeah.
And of course, you hear that in the world all
Everyone.
the time, and you don't internalize it until it happens to you. So, okay, this book was totally different writing experience than the last
Right.
one. Totally. So yeah, I don't know if it's because it wasn't fiction, my first memoir did take me like 8 years to write, but that's because it was my first book and I was learning how to write and I was also processing the grief. And, so I understand why that one took so long. The novel took me 18 months to start writing and publish, that timeline, 18 months. So I thought, okay, cool. I can publish a book a year. And then this one's taken me like
Right.
like 5 years or something.
Well,
But
as far as you say comparisonitis, did you make that term up on the fly?
no, that was a Joanna Penn thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I think comparisonitis is unavoidable in that we're not just sitting in some, like we're not an author from the 30s sitting around in some hotel writing and drinking cognac in a day. Like we're more socially integrated. And I think there's a positive comparison you can make too. You're going to people to learn from what they're doing, how they're doing it. And so if you're going to expose yourself to other people, you're going to open yourself up to comparisons. I think just be healthy with it. Don't compare yourself to, again, I think we said this earlier, don't compare yourself to Stephen King or Craig Martell or whoever is out there doing the thing at the tippy top of the game when you're starting out. Find those people in there who are figuring out their process and compare your process to theirs and make it more of like a colleague thing instead of a hero thing. Like I think that's just, we have to learn from each other without really like dampening our own like internal growth.
Yes. One of the things that has helped me too, I read this somewhere years ago and don't remember where, but having a mentor, like, or I don't want to say hero worship, but, like have
A mentor.
the
Yeah.
Stephen King, like, yes, I want to have Stephen King's life. I want to be that writer. And then also have the person that you look up to that's just a little bit further than you on your journey. I think that's kind of what you were saying
Yeah.
just now. Like
Yeah.
have both of those. So
Have an end goal and an
yeah,
immediate goal. Yeah.
yeah. And that has helped me too, to avoid, like you said, that I'll never be the next blah blah blah. Well, I could maybe be the next da, 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 da. I
Or
don't
just
know.
be the first you.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
I think that's Oscar Wilde and something like he said something like that. This is a hard thing. The comparison thing is just hard. You have to do it. You just have to do it healthy. It's like socializing. Like if you're an introvert, like you have to go out and see people, but just do it respecting your process. I
Have
don't
your
know.
tools in your tool belt and
Right.
all right.
Yeah. And
Yeah, do it healthy. I think that's good.
I think as a final thing too is you have to have something in your head that you can rewrite a book forever if you don't
Mm,
know when to stop. You have to have some internal something that tells you it's time to hand this off, whether it's to that developmental editor you've been pining over, it's the proofreader like Anthony St. Clair, you're saying, or it's the deadline you're going to publish it to the world. Like otherwise you could just rewrite for the rest of your life, and that
mhm.
is really unpleasant, I think.
So I think that a good mindset shift could be like if you're just again trying to learn your own process, you don't know, but you need that deadline to reach for. Set a deadline that you think is reasonable for your skill level, etc., and then make that the deadline where you check in.
Right.
So yeah, I'm either going to publish this book on January 1st or I'm going to check in and see what still needs to be done.
Right.
And that
Because
softens it a little.
your proofreader might have, you talk about all the things that could interrupt
Mhm.
your writing process.
Yeah.
Something could have interrupted your proofreader's editing process, proofing
Mhm.
process, and there's your 2 weeks. That's not on you. That's just
Yeah.
the
That's
way
just
the world
life.
works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Awesome. So we did promise that talking about production and publication schedules would not be scary. So I think that we accomplished
Pretty
that.
unscary.
No, it wasn't scary at all. So set your deadlines, figure out your process, and be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week where
See
we
you
are
next
going
week.
to be talking about spousal and partner receptivity to your work. It's kind of
Oh
a
boy.
mouthful, but basically, like, Are you getting, support at home for your job, for your calling? What's that like for you?
Interesting
So,
topic.
yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks for joining me this week, Eric, and we'll see you next week.
My pleasure. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.